Antec have been creating the P series range of chassis for many years. There's the P9, the P50, the P183 V3, P280, P380 and P100, and clearly there's no structure to their numbering systems. The P series have contained some of the best chassis that Antec have ever made, although most of those were at least a few years ago, and we're eager to see them get back on track. Now Antec is back with the P8, which follows the 2017 fashion of adding some glass, adding some lights and getting it to market. Of course, we're fairly sure that there's more to it than that, so let's jump in and take a look. Straight away, the P8 is a great looking chassis. It kind of reminds me of the P100 from about 3 years ago, although it doesn't quite look as premium or feel as durable as the P100 did. It's around £60 in the UK and $60 after rebate in the US, which is a freaking bargain for any tempered glass chassis. For comparison, the P100 was much more expensive at launch. The clean front panel on the P8 is slick enough to look smart in the office, but with just enough flair for the gaming market too. All the power controls are tucked down the left side of the front panel, which is going to make it very easy to hook up controllers, flash drives, and anything else that you may need. The same is true of the audio jacks. My only concern really is that if you have the chassis on the floor, any cables could stick out or trail on the floor quite easily, causing a trip hazard. But a little common sense on the user side would go a long way there. The ventilation is tucked down the left side too. That means an indirect airflow to any front mounted cooling. This is going to cut down on noise from the fans, but also means Antec were able to keep the bulk of the front panel looking neat and tidy. There's another party trick on the front panel too, but we'll see that in action shortly. Down the left side, there's a full-size tempered glass window. The glass is nice and clear, so even in brighter conditions, you're getting a great view of the interior. As with most glass panels, they're mounted with aluminium screws on rubber grommets. These not only look great, but make it easy to open up the chassis. The right side panel is pretty standard, but certainly functional, and will keep all of your cable gore out of sight. The P8 is pretty standard around the back too, although perhaps a little more basic than I would have liked. There's a pre-installed 120mm fan which has white blades and also subtle white lighting, which is great, and of course you could easily install a 120mm radiator here if you prefer. Moving down, you'll find 7 expansion slots, meaning multi-GPU systems are going to be easily accommodated. Unfortunately, only the top expansion slot comes with a reusable metal cover. The remaining 6 are the cheaper snap-off design. If you want to remove a card from your system, there's going to be a hole left in the back of the chassis. And of course you can buy screw-in covers, but snap-off covers are an oversight on that premium vibe. Personally, I would have rather paid a little bit extra to have these as standard. Finally, we have the Psu Mount, which uses an air intake on the base of the chassis, but unfortunately has no slide-out dust filter, and instead has a clip-in mesh filter on the bottom, which will get the job done, but again it takes away from the premium quality aspects and involves turning the chassis over instead of simply sliding from the rear. Of course, this filter and the snap-off covers will save Antec some money when making the chassis, which they've been able to pass on to the consumer by launching at such a low price point. The top panel has a large magnetic dust filter, which is great and brings that convenience and premium vibe back into play. There's room under it to mount a 120 and 140mm set of fans, and possibly some radiators too, though it does look like space will be limited to slim radiators, but even then the clearance from the motherboard may be an issue for some. Sadly, the Mercury 240mm doesn't fit, which I personally think is an oversight for those wanting a complete Antec ecosystem. Despite the relatively compact mid-tower design, there's quite a bit of space on the interior of the P8. Since there are no hard drive bays in the front, you're free to install the longest GPUs on the market without any issue. The power supply is hidden neatly away under a durable metal shroud, which does technically reduce the space, but it looks cleaner and bigger, which is no bad thing and personally a look that I love. Behind the motherboard you'll find a huge cutout which is going to make fitting CPU backplates a lot easier. The cable management system is rudimentary but sufficient too. I would have liked to have seen some more cutouts in the Psu cover for motherboard and GPU cables, as cables will have to trail just that little bit further without them. There are a few perks inside this chassis though. There are 3 120mm fans pre-installed, which adds value for money. They're all fitted with white fan blades and white LEDs too, and that's sure to look great through the tempered glass side panel. Those fitting radiators should remember that there is limited space in the top, so it may be best to avoid these for anything other than fans. Of course, you can mount a radiator in the front, and a cutout in the Psu cover means you can use the full height of the panel too. Finally, before we move around to the back, there are also 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounts here, allowing you to show off your favourite SSDs. There's not a lot going on around the back, but certainly enough little tricks here that I'm happy to see. There's a decent amount of cable routing space, and while more would be better, that Psu shroud really allows you to cram excess cables out of the way. While this doesn't look great, in my eyes, it's out of sight and out of mind. There are two 3.5-inch HDD trays down there too. Again, this keeps the bulky and often ugly hardware out of sight because let's be honest, a big silver block doesn't exactly look fantastic. Underneath you can see that the complete cage can be moved to give more space for cable management. Again, this shows some thought has gone into this case. Speaking of storage, there are two more 2.5-inch drive mounts here. They're likely going to be a nightmare to route cables effectively, but it's a small price to pay for even more storage capability. After the clip-in mesh filter on the PSU, I didn't have much hope for the front panel, but I'm pleasantly surprised to see a full height removable and washable dust filter. Clean airflow to the main part of the chassis is certainly welcome, though unfortunately you do have to pull off the panel on those awful compression clips, of which I've broken more in my life than I care to remember. The cables to the front panel are also a mess and make it impossible to completely remove the whole panel for cleaning, and it tends to dangle around needlessly. The build process on the P8 was pretty straightforward. There were some initial hiccups with trying to mount the radiator in the top, but as Antec said, support is limited and our motherboard did get in the way a little. Though you would have assumed Antec coolers would have fit with no issue. No major problem though, as we stuck it in the front of the chassis, and that means the CPU now gets more direct and cooler airflow. I did have some concerns about cable routing, but overall it looks pretty neat and tidy. It's a shame that there's no vertical pass-through on the PSU shroud though, as the cable has to trail over and under the graphics card a little. Around the back, cable management looks presentable. Of course, you're not really going to see it, but keeping it clean and tidy can't hurt. Space behind the PSU was limited, but as mentioned before, you can slide over the hard drive bays, which is a really handy feature. The last thing to do was to hook up the Molex for the chassis lighting. Molex though, really? SATA would have made more sense, as we all use that for storage devices. The only time we use Molex is if something on a chassis hasn't bothered to use a newer cable standard. But that's just like my opinion. A tempered glass chassis screams premium quality. Sure, it's only a small change from the old Perspex panels, but it's one I'm happy to see almost everywhere. So no going back to plastic now. Even if the P8 is not an expensive chassis, I would have paid a little more to see a few things tweaked. Ditch those snap-off expansion slot covers and get a slide-out dust filter for the PSU ventilation, and possibly make the chassis taller or wider to accommodate more radiator space up top. Otherwise, it may as well not have mounts in the top and keep the panel solid instead. Minor tweaks aside, this is still a pretty fantastic chassis. To see Antec deliver such a clean looking design is great, but to do so at such an attractive price point is simply amazing. It's easily one of the best looking and best value for money chassis in its class. It's going to look great in the office, gaming room, or anywhere for that matter, and we're certain it will complement any system build. And now for the good stuff. We're giving away this very chassis right here. Sadly, it will be empty with no components inside, but it's still a great prize that's worthy of being won. So if you'd like to find out more, simply click the link in the description below. For now, I hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, remember to subscribe to get more great video content directly to your inbox. Give us a like and comment, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.